Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Business Licenses 101. My name is Ashley, and I will be your host for today's webinar. I have a few items to cover before we get started. So first of all, just a friendly reminder that Avalara cannot provide legal tax advice, but we will answer your questions as best we can. On your screen is our safe harbor policy, so please take a moment to review that while I continue with some additional housekeeping items. First, we are recording today's webinar, so if you want to listen to it again or share it with a colleague, keep an eye on your email inboxes for the recording. Now, let's look at the console so you can see how to interact with us today. There is a Ask a Question box where you can submit questions for the presenters. We will be responding to questions individually, and we will also have time saved at the end for Q&A. So stick around for that if you're able to. Also, if you have any troubleshooting questions, having any issues with the console, you can submit that in the Ask a Question box and we'll help you out. Also at the bottom of your screen is a community chat icon. You can use that to interact or network with your fellow webinar attendees. So open that and drop in where you're calling in from today. I'm calling in from the snowy Midwest. We also have some related resources for you available on the console if you're interested in learning more about what we're discussing today. And then we also have reactions available if you want to let us know what you're thinking during the presentation. There's a smiley face icon at the bottom of your screen, and if you click that, there are some different emotions that you can respond to the slides with. So we are offering 1 CPE credit for today's presentation. For those looking to receive CPE credit, please note that we'll ask you to respond to 3 of our 4 poll questions. The poll questions will pop up on your screen for a limited amount of time. So please make sure you're ready to answer those when they appear. You must also attend at least 50 minutes of today's presentation. Once you have met those requirements, your certificate will be available to download in the Earn Certification box on your screen. You can also download the certificate in the post-event email that you'll receive later today. All right, I have a fun, quick plug for our season of CPE Giving series. This is the 2nd year that we've offered 5 webinars with 5 CPE credits in the month of December. And today kicks off the first webinar in that series. So we still have 4 remaining. We'd love to see you at more, so you can register for one or all of them that you see on your screen at avalaras.com/webinars. And that link is in the related resources. We also have a fun surprise today to spread the holiday spirit. So on your screen is an image that says, grab a coffee on us. And if you click that, you'll be able to get a cup of coffee on Avalara. Or if you prefer, you can donate that money to charity. So again, to do that, you'll just click the link, the image on your screen, enter your information, and then watch your email for further instructions on how to redeem that gift card. And just to note that this offer is only available during the live webinar today, not on demand. So make sure you fill the form out now if you want that gift card. All right, it is time to meet our presenters today. So first we are joined by Vicki, Product Solution Consultant at Avalara. Vicki, can you take a moment to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. We appreciate it. Vicki Basil, recovering CPA. Haven't practiced in a while, but did practice public accounting for quite some time. And now I am in private industry and working at Avalara for the last 6.5 years. And prior to that with a partner for about 4.5 years. So happy to be here and looking forward to this session.
Thanks, Vicki. And then we are also joined by Joe, Product Solution Strategist at Avalara. Joe, can you take a moment to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Joe. I'm the business license guy. I've been doing this for over 15 years at various companies and private practice. I'm an attorney barred in 3 states, New York, New Jersey, and Arizona. And been just doing licensing for forever. And this is the bread and butter.
Great. Thank you both for being here today. Before I hand it over, I just have one more thing, and that is our first CPE poll question. So that should be on your screen now. And the first question is, at your company, what department manages business licenses? So you have the options of accounting or finance, legal or compliance, operations, human resources, or other. So take a moment to respond to that. Just as a reminder, you need to answer 3 of the 4 poll questions and attend the webinar for 50 minutes if you would like CPE credit for today.
So Joe, this is always interesting to see where the people, what departments they work in, because it's always a crapshoot. You never know. You never know who gets the hot potato, right?
Absolutely. It's who draws the short straw for licensing.
Sometimes, yeah.
Great. So we'll give you just another second to respond to that, and then we're going to show the results. Okay, it looks like we have a lot of accounting and finance.
Yep, that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. I'll move us on to the agenda slide and hand it over to you.
All right, thank you. All right, so again, thanks everybody for being here. So today we're going to talk about business license basics, what types of licenses are out there, and how they differ, the consequences of non-compliance. So we'll have some examples of different states and counties and the interesting fines that they may levy for non-compliance, business license rules and ordinances that tend to really confuse businesses, what to do when your business license expires and you didn't mean for it to expire, and where a business license might be required and where it might not be. And then hopefully we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. But if as we're going along, if you have a question, please just put it in the Q&A. That way we do have a moderator checking those and they'll try to answer them live. So let's get right into the business license basics. So sometimes when I do this every day, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, talking to customers about licenses. And sometimes there's some confusion, Joe, about what are we actually talking about when we talk about business license, because it's a really super broad category. There's business licenses that you need to operate your business. We see permits on this, but those are really more like boots on the ground kind of people. And then there's tax registrations, which are based upon, Wayfair or physical presence nexus, but they sometimes open the floodgates, right? So can you kind of walk us through these 3 types?
Yeah, so it's very broad what we're seeing here, and especially within the licensing category, because we essentially have 2 different buckets where licensing comes from. So there's a revenue generation bucket, which is licenses to just do business, and often tax registrations as well. And then there's a consumer protection bucket, which is essentially, we talk about regulated industries and regulated business activities that we as a society want a little bit of consumer protections involved to make sure that not everyone should be doing this business activity or they shouldn't be doing it without certain safeguards in place. And then the permits are just making sure that things are operating the way that they should. And that, again, that level of oversight is important there as well. And the BL floodgates can get open with Nexus through a number of different ways, as we kind of we'll get into, but it might be sales, it could be employees, it could be different types of installations or people going into a jurisdiction. It's not just I have a brick and mortar location anymore. Those days have long since gone, as the states, the localities, the jurisdictions, they want to regulate and generate. Basically the two big words there from licensing.
Yeah, and generate revenue, regulate the industries. And I think it's really important to know, because it sounds like from that first answer, we do have a lot of accountants on the call. Sales tax and payroll tax registrations open you up to BL scrutiny. So in the past days, a lot of clients would be like, well, I only have a building here. Yeah, I registered for payroll there or sales tax because of economic nexus. But you have to be aware of your clients actually physically going into those jurisdictions, providing service installations. But also there are and we'll get a little bit more deeply into this, there are jurisdictions that are looking at gross receipts now, online gross receipts. So that is a risk, and that's going to become, I think, Joe, we can agree that's going to become more and more prevalent, because that's that generate revenue piece, because Wayfair is written so broadly that most of these jurisdictions don't have to change legislation or pass legislation to impose those BLs, right?
Yep. Regulate and generate. Those are the licensing words of the day.
All right. So this kind of so, it's a little bit different than sales tax nexus, as we talked about. It's that's a little bit more manageable. But when you look at the complexities, this slide is a great segue into that. Wow, this is kind of daunting. Look at how many localities there are: 35,000 municipalities, 3,500 or 3,000 counties. I think it's actually 3,500. Let's talk a little bit about that and the different types of nexus. What's generating these licenses, gross receipts versus fixed fee or square footage, and talk about location versus, physical location versus a service location.
Sure. And, it's state sales tax, only 50 states, 51 if you include DC, right, in the country. It's just so many more places you got to look at, so many more boards, so many more jurisdictions. The same activity could be regulated at multiple levels of government. So it's a whole different animal when you get down to it for licensing. And, as you talk about where you are, that's important. The city of Atlanta is a great example, because there's the city of Atlanta and there are 5 counties in Atlanta. And wherever you are could be what license you need. And then wherever you go could be what it is. You might have, you might be in DeKalb County and go cross the street, and all of a sudden, now I'm in city of Atlanta and I need a different license to go work across the street where your service area is. So service areas are key. If you're doing installations, if you have employees doing things there, if you have certain amounts of sales in these places, the business can change by business activity what that nexus or that triggering event is. So you got to know that. And it could be the amount of gross receipts that you have in there. It might be the business activity. It might be what it's going to be based upon. There's gross receipts, there's headcount, there are fixed fees. It's across the board.
Inventory valuation, if you had a distribution center.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the bigger things that we'll talk about is we get into the consequences of non-compliance,
Yeah. So I guess the takeaway from this slide is it's a lot bigger. It's a lot bigger and a lot more complicated than sales tax, because obviously the sales tax, Alabama, for example, lots of locales, but same concept with business licenses. They take that sales tax local registration all the way to the business license registration. You have county, you have city, you have local, you have municipal, you have potentially special taxing jurisdictions for business licenses. So there's a lot to think about. Okay, so moving on. So kind of good segue, Joe, consequences of non-compliance. So it's really hard to put like a number on the consequences. It really depends, a lot on what the situation is. But let's talk about what happens when you become non-compliant. The first impression of, and I see this every day, I guess, as I mentioned, I talk to customers every day about business licenses. They'll be like, well, what's the big deal if I'm non-compliant? It usually, and we had somebody actually recently at Crush in one of our sessions say, business licenses are just $25 each. They're all fixed fee, and that's not true. So as we know, if you go into a service location like you talked about and you sell $500,000 worth of services, or, you send a salesperson in there and sell $500,000 worth of product, and it's a gross receipts-based license, you have a problem. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, and and it goes beyond just it's a small fee. So I had a warehouse distribution. It was out in Nevada. I think it was over by Sparks, but maybe it was Pahrump. But anyway, less important, was handling their licenses for them, this company, and the manager, factory manager goes up there, distribution manager goes up to there on a Monday, and he finds out that the doors have been sealed shut. There are a lock and key, and they've been closed down for lack of a license. They go, they find out the license. They're calling me up. What's going on? I was like, I don't know. This is not a facility that we were working on for you, but let's see what we can do to help. They didn't. Essentially, the city went over there. They said, hey, you don't have a license. You're not on our list. We're shutting you down. They shut them down. And we got them the license. I think it was 3 days. So they shut down on Monday and they were reopened on Thursday. But 3 days shut down at this warehouse was a big deal. And it was over $100 license. Like, this wasn't a big one. This was $100, but you got shut down for 3 days. But you know what didn't get shut down? Your payroll. Your orders didn't get shut down. You were the stuff that was supposed to go in out. You had no product leaving. You had no revenue generating from this facility for 3 days. That's where you get into it. It's beyond just that, it was a $100 license and I paid, I think it ended up paying like $700 with all the fees and penalties involved. That's not the key. It's not that part there. It's that business disruption. It's that, your liquor license is gone. You can't sell liquor. It's your contractor license is gone. You can't be a contractor. And you think about those things. But even at that $100 license level, you can see a huge business disruption that can cripple businesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and losing, like, for an example, a liquor license like that, those are not really easy to get back once you lose it. You have to go through a lot of hoops to get those back. So making sure you're able to very easily manage your renewals and be able to see all of your licenses when they're renewing, have eyes on so that nothing drops off the end of the table. And it's not just about like business loss or, revenue loss, things like that. There's also a component of like public perception, right? There's that story of, we had a client who had a catering business, and she was home watching, this isn't funny, but it's kind of funny. She's home watching the news, and she sees the news outside of her catering company talking about how she doesn't have a food handling license. Her food handling license expired. Now, it was only, this news team went out and basically did a mass look at everybody whose licenses expired and then made a story out of it, and happened to stand outside of her catering business. Her license was only expired for, a couple of weeks. She just, the check was late, but it showed up on the news, and now everybody thinks, like, what's your first thought? Oh, they failed their inspections. The licenses, no, we're not eating there anymore, or we're never going to use that caterer again. So there is a lot about public perception too, so you really want to make sure you keep everything on the up and up. And because if there's ever an accident, if there's ever an insurance claim, you have to have all of your licenses have to be current. All right, so let's look at a couple of examples of these types of things. So billiard parlors, probably not a lot of billiard parlors out there, Joe, but why is there so much interest in a billiard parlor in Buffalo?
Yeah, it's just another example of a specific business activity that maybe you don't think of all the time, but can be put in here. The separate license could be required. If you have, a pool table in your bar, do you need to have a specific license for that pool table in addition to your liquor license and all that other stuff? So we can look at those things and specific business activity licenses for any new business activity you do, and for all the business activity you do, you have to make sure you're covered for.
Right. And that's a good point that you make, that most businesses, even CPA firms, they don't necessarily have that kind of expertise or the tools to be able to figure out what are those licenses, those specific local licenses that are needed by industry. So let's look at another one. Washington, D.C., individuals or businesses offering home improvement services such as remodeling or repairs must secure a home improvement contractor license in Washington, D.C. Now, that makes total sense, right? But I think that goes towards a lot of our clients that we've seen, a lot of our customers think, well, I have my state, Washington, D.C. is a different example, but I have my state contractor license. I don't need a local contractor license. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. And it's you have to be compliant at each phase. And again, for each activity too. So we talk about here specific for home improvement. So that means if you've got your general contractor license from DC, which covers commercial buildings, it ain't going to cover your home improvement work. So, you need to make sure, again, all activities, all types of customers are covered, and you have to make sure you're covered at each different level. So that means, we see it in Florida, especially, is a big one that we see this on, where you need a state license plus local licensing. California, another one, you need to have your state licenses, and then you got to have all your local licenses at the county, at any county you're working in, at any city you're working in. And, it can add up pretty quick as far as the number of licenses you are if you want to spread that business out. You want to stay in your lane a little bit where you will only do work in Miami Beach. That's one thing. But as soon as you go into Sunny Isles, or you go into the city of Miami, you go to Homestead, you want to go up to Broward County, it increases the licensing.
Mm-hmm. And there's also a concept which a lot of people don't know about, like the handyman type licensing. You're not necessarily a contractor, but you're out providing services, handyman services. There's licensing for that as well, right?
Or bid limits is another one. Do you have the right classification to do work the size that you're looking at? Do you have the insurance parts that are supposed to be put into place there? It goes well beyond all of those things. You have the right subcontractors in there. And, especially in contract, you can see where it really comes in. You can't pull that building permit. You're going to have a lot of trouble doing that work and getting paid for it.
Right. And then, not to beat the contractors to death, but there's the concept of reciprocity, right? So there's licenses that have reciprocity across different states, but it's very hard. And then you need qualifiers for contractor type licenses, who are holding the quote unquote license in their name or the authority in their name. That's extremely complex for a small business or even an accounting firm to navigate.
Yeah.
All right, let's look at the next one. Restaurants. Restaurants are always complicated. So a restaurant in New Orleans, for example, that hosts live music needs a specific live entertainment permit. So when you're talking about a restaurant, there's so much to take into account, right? You have the alcohol, you have the food service, you have the serve safe licenses, you have the training that the bartenders need to have that you have to keep track of. But now you add the concept of live music. Totally different ball game, huh?
Mm-hmm. Again, every activity, serve alcohol is an activity, serve food is an activity, entertainment's an activity. You're going to have, based upon the number of seats in some areas, it's going to be another license. If you want to put like the outdoor seating or patio, that's a different one there. If you're going to have food certain ways, so if you do different types of food, that can also require different licensing too. It's really, you got to know every single thing you're doing, and then make sure you're licensed correctly where you are. Like restaurant, it's a little bit, you're generally in a single area, so can figure out what's required from you right here. But still, you have to make sure everything is covered.
Yeah, but those that have franchise type licenses, they need to expand that and scale that across different states, different counties, different locals. So that is a very complex
Absolutely.
thing.
It is.
And a lot of times,
it's not
I've
shocking.
Go ahead, finish your thought.
No, I was going to say, and what happens in one locality, they don't care about in the next locality. Right. It's California and Texas don't get along and don't agree on what you need. It's not it's the way the world works. And it's the same thing right next door. Raleigh, North Carolina doesn't always care what Durham, North Carolina wants.
Right. And I've seen that where the restaurant decides, hey, we're just going to put seats outside this summer, and have a sidewalk cafe, and the inspector comes and they shut them down because they don't have a permit or license for that service. All right, let's see what else we have in here. Zoning. So zoning is an interesting one because that can be much more onerous than just historic districts like this one in Nashville is talking about historic districts where you can't do certain type of work. But we see zoning a lot. So talk about this example a little bit, but then expand upon it into like our M&A work where we've seen where acquisitions are being made, but the zoning has been grandfathered and it's changed. And when you acquire that business, the zoning is no longer applicable to the business you're running.
Yeah. So, we saw this in a M&A work we did recently for, they were buying up a lot of collision centers for auto repair and body work. And so this larger company was buying up a lot of like the mom and pops. And in one case, we ran across it where the mom and pop had basically been grandfathered into their zoning there. And any change of ownership would nullify that zoning variance is essentially what it was, where it was grandfathered in that they came up here. So you want to buy that owner, that shop or that, that particular one there, you're not gonna be able to continue to have a collision shop there. So what's the point of buying it? Yeah, so you can't do that activity there anymore unless you go and you get this another zoning order variance essentially to keep it there. And those things pop up all the time. Or you change the way
the acquisition is done, right? You change the way the acquisition is done so that there's no change in the structure of the ownership. But that's a good point of when you're thinking about these kinds of things, you really need tools or a partner who can provide that kind of service for you. Like there's no expectation that the collision repair company that's making these acquisitions is going to have a legal team that is capable of doing all of this M&A research and this kind of specific business license research. So it's super important that you align yourself with a partner like Avalara who can provide those services. Now, this particular example,
absolutely,
historic zoning is, I see that even where I am, where you can't remove stone walls, you need a license to do that. Like, have you seen this type of historic zoning come into play?
Yeah, I've seen it, especially in New York. I saw it several times where just you couldn't do certain things. They wanted one I had a couple of years ago. They wanted to put in a bed and breakfast in this beautiful old Victorian, but they had to fix it up a little bit first, and that affected what they could do. And what they get the license, you have to have certain requirements to have your bed and breakfast, your short-term rental, in order to, but they also had separate requirements that they had to keep within there. And one of the requirements was they wanted to rip out the walls to put basically internet in the rooms. They're going to put some Ethernet cords. They weren't able to do that. To do that there, they had to work around it they had like an outside Wi-Fi thing, so that was what they worked around. But knowing all of those things and kind of putting them all together, that, okay, in order to get one here, you're supposed to be able to provide Wi-Fi, but you can't provide Wi-Fi in this particular building the way you thought you were going to. And being able to work around and get those two things to kind of work there is how you're able to kind of do that.
Yeah, and that's really hard as just a layperson to know about those special districts, special zoning districts, special taxing districts that control that kind of stuff. So again, partnering with somebody who has that expertise is important. So another bizarre example of weird licensing in this season of giving is collecting clams for commercial resale in Rhode Island. So this is like, I live in New England, people who go clamming and want to sell the clams that they catch. So talk a little bit about this one.
Yeah, and there's, if there's a will, there's a lawyer. I think that there's a activity, there's a license sometimes. Somebody will figure out a way to regulate it or generate income from it, from a government. And this is, a shellfish license. In order to get those clams and get them for commercial sale, you need to have a shellfish license, which is, different than the food license is another part of it there. That's what it is. Right. The getting it, repacking, shipping, shucking them is a license, different from, actually cooking them and selling them in that way. So there's two different things there. And that's, it can get crazy. One of my favorites is in Texas. In order to do electronics repair, you need to have a private detective license. Yes. for certain categories with laptops. One of my favorites. Like, who would have thought that would be true? And yet, the people in Texas did.
Yeah, and yes, I've heard of that one as well. One interesting thing on this Rhode Island one is if you read the fine print, in order to get that shucking and repacking license, that shellfish license, you need to present your building and operations plan for them to review prior to. So again, having a team, a partner who knows that, who's able to do that kind of research and say, hey, here's the order of operation of the things that we need to do. We need to get these things in place first before we even apply for that shellfish license. That's super important because businesses spend a lot of time, wasting money on lawyers and accountants and, spinning their wheels if they don't know the order of operations of how. Same thing with sort of like zoning. If you're building a new building, we know, do you need the CO? Do you need what inspections do you need? We'll tell you all of that before, we start pulling the licenses. So very important. All right, so those were some weird topics. So let's talk about the topics of concerns that most companies have. So what are like the misconceptions around all licenses not being, they're not the same. All the cities and counties are not the same. You touched on this a little bit, and regulated industries are not the same. So I think that misconception of what we heard in our crush session was, well, why is this a big thing? Why are we even having a session? All business licenses are $25, So talk just a little bit about those misconceptions.
Yeah, so there's a lot of it that business licensing is not important, or it's just very small amount of liability. But that really isn't the case in a lot of places. Now, I won't say it's never the case, because there are some jurisdictions that just want their $25 and to put you in the the town gazette as a new business that they have there. That's all they want. But there's a lot of places that want a lot more. And penalties and fines, the most common penalty for not having a license or doing business without a license or not renewing is a fine or a penalty. It's by far the most common, but it doesn't mean that is a nominal fine or a nominal penalty. I have had some terrible stories where, for simple, besides the one we shared earlier with the distribution center got locked down, I have seen CEO's house get a lien because they didn't pay their business license taxes. I have seen them attach a plane in Broward Airport where the CEOs went and took a private plane and they fly commercial back home to get it back. I have seen, obviously, I've seen domino discipline in the pharmaceutical industry where they didn't renew in Alabama. Alabama disciplined them, a couple $1,000s of fines, but you have to disclose that to all 50 states, which led to Colorado disciplining them because they got disciplined in Alabama, which led to Alabama disciplining them again because of Colorado discipline for the original Alabama, which then led to Washington discipline because now you have 3. And it's like, well, if you only had 1, I wasn't going to do anything, but now you got 3. So the longest I had was, I think I had 6 disciplinary actions flow out of a single missed license. And wow. I mean, it cost them it ended up costing them hundreds of thousands of dollars to get everything done. Once you go out of all the fines, all the different ways that they had to notify and all of that. So it comes into place all the time there. And, we see this. Why does this happen? Why do people not have the proper licensing? So often there's an ignorance place here where I didn't know I needed that type of license. Well, ignorance is not going to save you, but you have a new service, you have a new product, you're going to a new area. All of those things could require additional licensure. And then who's got the potato?
Right. Who's got the hot potato? That's a big issue. Is that a lot of companies, nobody's dedicated to the job of business licenses. It's spread out across multiple groups. Nobody's really managing it, and then compliance is always a moving target, right? That the jurisdictions change. They change their rules. They change their type of license. They change what they're requiring licenses for. That's super hard for businesses who are trying to make money to keep up on, and that's again why partnering with somebody like Avalara can help in that regard, because that's all we do all day long. So we
and
should,
even the jurisdictions can change too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The lines.
I've seen annexations by cities of different unincorporated parts of counties and stuff like that, where all of a sudden, now you need a license.
Yeah.
Or now you need, you used to need the county license, now you need the city license.
Right, exactly. And we're seeing a lot of enforcement through audit letter, like through letter. So they're picking up on the sales that you're having in certain counties, and they're saying, or we saw your van drive through. We saw you. We did an audit of such and such company. We saw you were a vendor. Hey, you need to report to us. So again, we do have to pick up our pace a little bit because we're going a little too slow. But the hot potato concept. Again, this week we had a poll question on this. It varies who is responsible for business licensing, but the most important concept from this is if you do need to have multiple groups handling it, you need one source of truth for the licensing. You need one place where all those licenses are held so that every stakeholder can see what's going on in the license area. Let's get to poll question 2. Ashley?
Thank you. Yes, our second poll question should be on your screen now. It is, how many licenses does your company or firm currently manage? There's some options for you there. You can pick the one that applies and then hit submit. And this is our second poll question out of 4. So we'll give you guys just a moment to respond to this.
Okay, so.
And then here are the results. Any surprises here before we move on?
No, it would be if I knew the industries a little bit better, but this is usually what we see. It's about right. So we'll keep moving. All right, so understanding your business compliance needs, again, a very important concept. So this slide, we're not going to spend a ton of time on this slide, but this slide just kind of gives you a bird's eye view into industries that are highly licensed. So the left side is regulated industries, the right side is non-regulated industries. Now, again, this doesn't take into all the nuances of each business. A supermarket with 20 licenses very well could be if it has a florist, a pharmacy, a grocery, milk, dairy, has a coffee shop, has a lottery, has WIC and food stamps, lots of licensing. But think about that from your own business or from your client perspective, the clients that you have. If you have a client with numerous restaurants or numerous supermarkets or numerous convenience stores, lots of licensing going on there. But don't forget about the non-regulated industries. Even though retail is generally only a business license and, maybe an alarm and burglar permit, if they're serving coffee or tea, they might need a food license. If they have numerous retail stores, you multiply that by the number of retail stores. So there's a lot going on in all the industries. So the point is that there's lots of licenses. I hear beeping, so I'm not sure where that's coming from. So talking about convenience stores, again, Joe, regular licenses, fuel, alcohol, tobacco, gasoline, could have CBD products, eggs, milk, like the sky's the limit, right?
Absolutely. And it's going to depend slightly where you are. As you went to all those different types of licenses just off the top of your head, it's really gets kind of crazy with that. And then basically just 2 things to remember. Locations, activities equals licenses. So you break down each different activity in a convenience store, whether that, fuel to the food, to the different types of food, to alcohol, to CBD, to tobacco, to lottery, to WIC, to SNAP, all of those different things. Those are all different activities, all different licenses. And then times that by a number of locations, and it adds up pretty quickly.
Exactly. Same deal with supermarkets. Supermarkets can even have those outdoor cafes or restaurants. I've seen restaurants inside of supermarkets, vending, coin machines,
deli,
or they're having
kosher,
sushi
bakery.
bar. Yeah, crazy number of licenses for supermarkets. Retailers, like what I was saying, it's really not as simple as you think. There could be ancillary services. So if you're providing services or installation. Let's talk a little bit about this, the risk of sending your people to install or service products from a license perspective.
Yeah. So this is another
big
one,
risk.
Big risk here, because you think, oh, well, I made my sale in one location, right? And that's where I paid my sales tax, because that's where it was sold. But if I send someone to install it the next town over, the next county over, and that's part of it. And this installation could be as simple as hanging the TV on the wall. It could be servicing or maintaining something. Like if you sold, you have the repairman go out to help out with the dryer or anything like that. You're going to have the pool guy is going to go and he's going to do different parts of the different pools in different areas. It doesn't have to be that you're remodeling the kitchen. It could be that you are changing the light in the refrigerator. That kind of maintenance could bring up the licensing in the different jurisdictions. Right. You have to know where you are, where your people are at all times.
And even the delivery, right? Delivering in your own trucks is you could wind up with a delivery license or trucking licenses that have DOT consequences. Like there's so much to think about when it comes to licensing, and it's people think it's easier than it is, and it unfortunately isn't. So that's sort of like a good segue into contracting. You talked about it's not just renovating the kitchen. There's so much to contracting, right? Because there's lots of hidden licenses too. So you might have your GC license, but you have all of your workers who have to have their E1, their E2, their P1, their P2, all these other licenses, and you need to be licensed in all of the areas that you're providing these services. So if you're doing roofing or windows or siding or anything like that, your clients are doing that or you're doing that. It's not enough to just have a business license in wherever your headquarters is or wherever you're dispatching your people from. You have to think about those install and service areas as well.
And it might not even be enough if you're not even doing the work. I deal with a lot of contractors that do a lot of subcontracting out. Yes. Well, guess what? You can't be on the contract if you don't have the proper licensing for that type of work. So you still have to make sure that you are the proper licensures, and there's probably major classifications to include the lower classifications in order to be there.
Yeah, and those gross receipts, especially in those gross receipt states, those gross receipts are going to you as the contractor who subbed it out. So you're going to be reporting that income, and that's the receipts they're going to be looking at for that business license. So let's talk a little bit about telecom.
Yeah. Telecom's an interesting one because, you don't always think about it from a licensing perspective, but, you have a cell phone tower, we see it with same with billboards and those sort of things. You don't think of that as a location because you're not selling anything there, right? But you may have to have a business license for it. Different retail stores within telecom boards and where you're using those types of fibers and all of that. It doesn't always say, you don't always think, oh, hey, I'm doing retail here, so I don't need a license, but you probably need it. And you might be a prerequisite for some of your communication services taxes too, when you're dealing with those telecom industries. So it's important to get them, otherwise you could have more issues pop up.
And it sort of speaks to that sort of like intangible location theory, right? In business licenses, you mentioned billboards, solar, telephone poles, cell towers, solar arrays, things that you think might not be generators. You might have generators in places. They are locations from a perspective of you doing business. So you got to keep those in mind. Healthcare, tons of licenses. They have
Tons
so
of
much. Yeah, talk a little bit
and
about that.
it's across the board. And we talk about certain things that are consumer protection. Healthcare definitely fits into that bucket, right? And just thinking about the supply chain of a drug is a good one that I always use an example. So manufactures a drug in New Jersey, Pharmacy Row up there. He then gives it to a wholesale distributor in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. The wholesale distributor outsources this to a 3PL in Tennessee. The 3PL then sends it to a pharmacy in California for retail pharmacy. And what you have here is a supply chain where you need all sorts of licenses. So the retail pharmacy in California needs that California license. The 3PL in Tennessee needs Tennessee and California. The wholesale distributor in Pennsylvania needs Pennsylvania, Tennessee, California. And that manufacturer needs New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and California, because whatever this drug's going to go in the supply chain, you need to be ready for it and go across the board, have your licenses there. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble. And we see it, that's from a drug perspective. You see the different types of places within that drug and that supply chain, but also your urgent care facilities, all of your assisted living facilities, all of your home health facilities and home health aides, all your registered nurses, all of these things need to be licensed, and you need to keep track of them. Otherwise, you're going to see a lot of liability really quick.
Yeah. And I'm seeing also a lot of like veterinary healthcare type, where there's been a lot of M&A in the veterinary space, and they're franchising, and that they need to scale, and that's a huge thing. The other thing about the professionals, like you mentioned, the nurses all have to be licensed. That's true in contracting, in engineering, in healthcare. There's lots of professional, like tradesmen and professionals, that you must have license. And we just recently had accounting. Yeah, it's a great one. We just had a really good example of a engineering firm that went out to bid on a very large project. It was, multiple six figures, and they submitted their bid, and they listed all their engineers with their license numbers, and the customer checked all of the licenses for all the engineers, and one of the engineers had let his license expire, and they lost the bid because of that. So really super important that that your people's licenses are up to date, and having a system that can track that for you is super important because when you get to that point, Excel's not going to cut it anymore. You really need a system for that type of work. All right, so let's get to poll question 3, so we make sure everybody at least has 3 questions and can get out of here with their CPE.
Sounds good. Yep. The third question is, at your company or firm, how many licenses does a person manage at one time? There's several options. So pick the one that applies to you and then hit submit. And as a reminder, you need to answer 3 of the 4 poll questions in a 10-15 minutes. And this is the third poll question.
Yeah. And if it's okay, if we could keep going, and then when you just get the results, you can just shout them out, Ashley. I just want to make sure we cover as much as possible.
Yep. We can show the results now. Yep. There we go.
Yeah. And these results, this really lends itself to expertise in your firm or in your company and your automation tools, right? How are you able? So if you are doing most everything on Excel with many disparate systems, you can probably process far fewer licenses than you could if you were doing it with a tool, that was purpose-built for business license management. Okay, so managing the license lifecycle with automation. Oh, that's a great segue into this. So the lifecycle of a license is, it's interesting. So you're going to get your renewal data, right? So, and sometimes you need to know things. You need to know the head count, the square footage, the gross receipts, the inventory value at that location. So you do have to pull some data together. Then you're getting the forms, you're receiving the forms, and sometimes you don't get the renewal form. So you have to proactively go out and get those, and if you decide you don't want to do this anymore and you want to outsource with somebody like Avalara, that's something that we proactively do. We go out and get those forms to make sure that, you are not late with your filing. So, but that sometimes is work. You have to call and hopefully somebody answers the question and you get the form. Then you have to prepare the form. And this, might require you to know things that you may not necessarily do in your day-to-day job. Like you might need the square footage or the lessee or lessor information for your properties. You might need the directors and officers names. You need to know the exact names of the legal entities, things like that. So when you're automating, you need a system that will help you build a corporate library of that type of data so that you have it on hand. Or if you're outsourcing, you need a company that will build that corporate data and mine it themselves without pestering you every year for the same information over and over again. Calculating the fees, sometimes it's surprising how often mistakes are made at this juncture of the process. It is somewhat of a science, it's a skill to do that calculation and make sure that you're using all the right data to do those calculations. And then you submit your forms. Now, online filings are not always easier than postal mail. Sometimes you're required to file online and you just have to, but a lot of these jurisdictions are still, kind of Luddites and in the old school, and they haven't automated to the point where they're accepting online filing. So you have to put a piece of paper with a check into an envelope with a stamp and mail that. So that's a process that you have to be aware of, like who accepts online and who doesn't. And then once that's submitted, you're kind of in that holding stage, right? Of I've applied, I've paid, and now I'm waiting for that certificate. And a lot of companies, this is where it falls off the end of the table. They paid it, they forget about it, they don't go and get that certificate. And sometimes the authority doesn't send it. Sometimes they send it to the store or the retail establishment, and some kid at the checkout counter throws it in the garbage because they don't know what it is, or they don't cash your check gets lost in the mail. You need to make sure that you keep that process, you finish the process and you get that certificate, and then next year it all starts all over again. So having a way to automate that makes total sense. So really what I see in the field, Joe, and you can correct me or if you see other things, but most of the time, I'd say 85% of the time, I see customers who have an Excel spreadsheet. So if this sounds familiar to anybody, put a thumbs up in the chat. An Excel spreadsheet for managing your licenses that'll have the license number, the authority, the renewal date, the expiry date, and the filing frequency. Then they'll have another Excel spreadsheet that's going to have all their usernames and passwords for their online filings. They'll keep Outlook folders in their Outlook or Gmail for their correspondence. So they'll I see some thumbs up going. They'll create folders like Georgia, then they'll have Fulton County and DuPage County, and they'll have all these folders for where they're keeping all their correspondence. Then they'll have a Google Drive or a shared drive, some form of a shared drive to store all the digital copies of their licenses. And then sometimes, oh wow, there's a lot of thumbs up going on this screen. Then sometimes they'll create an Outlook calendar or a Gmail calendar to try to track their online filings. That is really hard to do, what I just described. And that's why I'm always talking to these customers, right? Because they're like at the point where I got to do something different. So we have a tool called Avalara License Management that can help. It centralizes your business licenses. It puts all of those things that I mentioned into one place so that you have a single source of truth for licensing. You can look at all the thumbs are going. You can have stakeholders in your business. You can have multiple entities, unlimited locations, unlimited licenses, and everybody can see what's going on. You can even have read-only users for like the CFOs of the world who just want to make sure that everything is going right. Then you can standardize your workflow. Our system has a built-in workflow in it that is really defines us in the industry. It's a customizable workflow that can be built to match your workflow. It digitizes all your paperwork, so everything can be online. So, and in your SaaS-based system, and it's secure. It's SOC 2 Type 2 certified. So if you have a license in the system and one of your retail establishments, the inspector comes in and they don't have their license on the wall, they can log in as a read-only user and get that license. And then it minimizes all of that time you're spending on that wheel that I showed you. Like, everything is in there. There's also a component of outsourcing at Avalara, where if you said, I just don't want to do this, you can hand it over to Avalara, and we can do all of that for you in the same SaaS-based platform, where you would be the passenger in the car instead of the driver of the car. So there are solutions out there for you. I saw lots of thumbs up going. So let's summarize, Joe. So let's kind of take us through the Avalara license management. Summarize, where you feel we need to be at this point.
Sure. And, basically what it comes down to is, at some point you reach a tipping point with the current processes of Excel. And I love Excel, and I love Outlook, and I love all those programs individually, but I don't like using 15 different things to accomplish one little part of my business, especially when it's non-revenue generating, like business licenses. But if I don't do it, I'm not going to generate any revenue. So by having the renewal calendar at a glance, by having the workflow at a glance, by being able to assign tasks, you can sign emails through it, basically a one-stop shop for this whole system. It allows the same person that reached the tipping point with those Excel programs to scale and be able to do a lot more. And they can do a lot more. That's good for growth, or that's good for, to take this onerous part of non-revenue generating activity, scale it down so there's more time with existing headcount and existing resources to do more revenue generating activities.
Yeah, more with less. That's what we all say, right? So we're going to push ahead to the last poll question. Let's get that done.
Yep, this poll question is pretty easy. Would you like follow-up from an Avalara sales rep? Just click yes or no and hit submit. If you hit yes, we will follow up with you. So, Vicki, I'll pass it back to you if you want to move on to Q&A or go back.
Yes, let's go to Q&A. Jim, we have like 3 minutes left for Q&A. Let's see what we got in here. I did see something about internet sales. So let's spend like 30 seconds, Joe, on internet sales. We touched on that. The nexus, business licenses has historically been physical presence nexus, but we are seeing authorities pulling online sales into the gross receipts calculations. Can you just touch on that very quickly so we can get a couple other questions?
So from a licensing perspective, they're shifting in that direction for sure. And right now, basically, I would say it depends what you're selling to see where that's going to be as far as license requirement is going to be important there. As we already talked about, you're selling drugs, medical devices, durable DME, HME, any of those types of things, over the counters even, you're going to see more licensing. If you're shipping a T-shirt, you're not going to see much right now. We think that's going to change over the next few years, but that's kind of where it's shipping food. It's going to be, licensing, because you've got that consumer protections. That consumer protections really in those interstate sales right now, but once we get out of that, and I think we're going to see more and more, that seems to be the way the trade winds are flowing, where we're going to see more and more licenses to come into the states. It's basically the states get more autonomy over those sorts of issues and kind of catch back up to the internet e-commerce of the world.
Right. Yep. Okay, and then we have a question in here about identifying compliance requirements in specific locations for specific activities. So as a customer of Avalara, of either our outsourced or our self-serve platform, the passenger in the car versus the driver of the car, you can take advantage of our professional services. So we do have a team of professionals that all they do is business licensing, research, audits, gap analyses. They'll research, prep, and file for our outsourced customers for new locations. So yes, we do have that capability in our system to provide that kind of service. Let's see what other questions we have in here. If a contractor works with a subcontractor and they have their business registration certificate, does the contractor also need a copy of the contractor's license too, or would that fall under the subcontractor who does the work? You should always have copies or the expiry due information on your subcontractors. You should definitely.
Yeah.
You agree with that, Joe?
You're basically
Always have that.
you're going to be responsible. Yeah, you're going to be responsible for them to be licensed, essentially. And that license is going to depend on the state, again, what that actually looks like. But if you as the prime contractor, you will be responsible that all of your subs are properly licensed where they're doing work.
Yeah, and we'll get time for one more. Would the contractors need to have a copy on the job site? So yes, I've been on job sites. I used to do a lot of construction project management. I've had job sites where inspector came in, lined up all the electricians, and everybody had to take their license out of their pocket. So as part of when you're on a job site and you're hanging your permit out, you have to have your permit conspicuously hung. That is proof that the GC has their contractor license. They would not have been able to get the permit without the contractor license. But all of your subs on site must have their licenses on hand. Now, in our system, with that read-only capability, they can log into the system with any handheld web-enabled device and show a copy of their license if you're storing it in there, if for some reason they didn't have it on them. So I think we're over time. We will get back to all the questions. Our team will put them in Excel and we'll answer them and send them out to you. But for now, I think we need to wrap it up. Huh, Ashley?
Yeah, thanks, Vicki and Joe, for presenting. And we had a couple people on the back end answering audience questions in the chat. So thanks to them as well for today. I just have a couple things to wrap up with. So for upcoming webinars, quick reminder about our season of CPE giving. We hope to see you back for one of these 4 webinars. And then if you haven't already, now is your chance to grab that cup of coffee, the image on your screen. You'll click that and you can fill out the form, and then you'll receive an email later today with instructions. If you registered for the webinar a couple days in advance, you should already have the email. You were on the pre-approved list. And if you registered more recently, I'll have to go in and manually approve that. So just hold tight if you registered for the webinar pretty recently. And then to close out, if you qualified for CPE credit, you can download your certificate now in the CPE certificate engagement tool. If you don't get a chance to, you'll receive a post-event email later today with a link to download that. And you'll also get a link back to this recording and the slide deck. So thank you all so much for joining us today. And this concludes today's webinar.
Thank you.